Welcome to the Boulder Street Conversations podcast. We're so glad you're here. This podcast exists as a resource to our community to go deeper into the conversations we have on Sundays. We just started a sermon series on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus teaching in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Excited to get into the content with you today. Well, we just had Easter Sunday here, and Pastor Dan preached a wonderful message, kind of wrapping up Sermon on the Mount, as well as celebrating Easter together. So I got the pastoral team from Boulder Street Church here at the table. And Dan, I would love for you to share just kind of some of the big takeaways from your message and some of what you shared yesterday.
Yeah, super fun, just celebrating the resurrection together, and loved it. And so we were wrapping up our series we've been in the Sermon on the Mount. So this is officially our last podcast for this time. I'm sure we'll come back, but on the Sermon on the Mount. And so rather than detouring from that, Jesus' final story, really, this is a bit of a parable, but is the story of the wise and foolish builders. And Jesus says you've heard all of this, me say all of this, but those who hear it and put it into practice are like a wise man who builds on the foundation, on the rock. And when the storms come, his house stands, and the foolish man builds on sand. And when those same storms come, his house collapses. And so really use this opportunity to talk about Jesus, the rock of our salvation and our firm foundation. And so not only talking about being the wise and foolish builder, but that we are building on Jesus. And just so, I believe that even as Jesus was saying this, there is so much scriptural imagery of the Messiah as the rock of salvation, the cornerstone. I think maybe he was just giving some foreshadowing. I would not be surprised if it was another one of those moments where Jesus is telling everybody, hey, I'm him, and letting them know I am the rock. And so, so that's where we talked about Matthew 7.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to just kind of hear some big takeaways from anybody else. I think for me, the distinction that Jesus is the foundation and then the Sermon on the Mount stuff is the building we're building was really helpful. I think that it could get confusing as to what's the foundation, because there's so many good things in the Sermon on the Mount. And although it's a counterintuitive life, it is one that makes sense to our souls. Like, oh yeah, I do want to live in that kind of a kingdom. So it would maybe be easy, this is maybe speaking for me, but to build my life on one of those ideas that is in there. Don't be anxious. I'm going to build my life on trusting Jesus with that, but really I'm more focused on anxiety than knowing Jesus, or pick your thing that's in there. And so I thought it was really helpful to just zero in on he is the one that we build the foundation on, and the other stuff is the good stuff of being in the kingdom, but it's the stuff we build around the life.
As well as I think living the Sermon on the Mount does not negate that the storms are going to come.
Right.
And they're not going to earn that storms aren't going to come now. Like, you're just completely sheltered and protected because you're choosing to live this message, so I think what stood out to me was just the reality of, it's like we don't dodge storms, even when we're in the kingdom, or even when we're, saying yes wholeheartedly, I want to live this lifestyle. Like, storms have come and storms will continue to come. It's what, just a good reminder.
Yeah, and then the foundation matters. Yeah, the foundation matters.
I think even in the imagery, it seems to be that Jesus is talking about two people that are in the same neighborhood, and they get hit by the same storms. And even it sounds like their houses were built the same. So you could even argue someone who would be living the quote unquote Sermon on the Mount lifestyle, and you can't tell the difference between the houses until the storm comes and you realize, oh, the foundation wasn't Jesus. It was just a certain type of living, because the story is these two houses were built, and people don't walk by and think, oh, that one will stand storms and that one won't. It's actually, no, they look the same. And so maybe their lifestyle looks the same. But when the relationship with Jesus, the understanding of Jesus as foundation isn't there, that's when things begin to crumble.
Well, and it's what you just preached last week about like you prophesied in my name.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you healed in my name, but away from me, I never knew you. And so it's just wild that it's like we can have fruit, we can have the same looking house, all on the exterior, even very spiritual things. But do we know him?
Yeah.
It comes back to relationship with him, intimacy with him. That's the foundation.
Yeah. Yep. And to tie it back to the Beatitudes, are we broken enough in spirit to know that we need him? Know that we'll come back to him, you know? And so the foundation being Jesus is so huge. Yeah. I think I would love to talk about some of the ways to shore up that foundation. We could go there a little bit, unless somebody else has something that you want to talk about. How do we know that we're, you know what I mean, that we're building on the rock? Would be a question I would maybe ask to the table.
Yeah.
Oh, go for it. Jinx. I think when we first started this, the whole premise of the Sermon on the Mount was talking about how to live in the kingdom that is drawing near. And I think a lot of times, even what we're talking about, towards the end of the Sermon on the Mount, we see a lot of like the splitting, the fork in the road.
Yep.
And a lot of, hey, you can do this or you can do, I want to go there. I was going to sing it. But I think in that fork in the road is, are we going to do this in our own strength, in our own way of living, or are we going to remember who is at the epicenter of this kingdom that is drawing near, that is close, that is right in front of your face, and that is Jesus. Jesus, the one speaking to them and giving them all this advice, really how they're going to get good at living this and building the house on the foundation is being right next to Jesus and talking with him and having life with him. And I think it's that wisdom never expired. That the best way to function in all of these truths, to live in the household of the kingdom, is to be next to the one who this is all for, at the epicenter of it all. And it's relating to Jesus and understanding that split and how those function with him or without him.
I think Jesus, it's fun to look at. Jesus lays out, here's how to live the blessed life.
Yeah.
And it looks way different than you would think. It's humility, it's righteousness, it's meekness. And then he goes into, you've heard it said, but I say, and he raises the bar from the law into the heart, and he continues on. And then we get to the end. And I think with what we're talking about here, it's almost like he's saying, don't make this a new law. It's about a person. It's about the
Don't fool
foundation.
yourself.
It's about the foundation is me. And relationship matters. And so he says, and we'll get into this, but the way to construct the house is hearing this and then go do it. Don't just hear it, because it's no good to just know something and not do it. But it's also not just doing it without actually having the conversation and the relationship. And so I don't know. I think there could be that invitation of don't make this the new works-based thing, because it's about me. It's about Jesus being the foundation. I think it's fun, and this could be controversial. I don't know. But the idea, Jesus, the craftsman, and that word we have interpreted and we all know as carpenter, the woodworker, but the craftsman would be the Greek word there. And so even just reading, different commentaries and scholars who would say it's possible that Jesus was less of a carpenter in terms of how we think of it, and more of someone who works with his hands with the materials he had, which in that place at that time would have largely been stone. And so it's like he gets super practical, like, hey, let me tell you my lived experience. This is not like a good analogy. This is like what his profession was. This is the stoneworker ending up the person who's probably seen and worked on foundations. And he's saying, hey, let me tell you, here's what I am. I'm a construction worker. I know how to lay a foundation. This is what it looks like. And so just the practicality of it, one of our favorite commentaries that we all read said that this is no illustration formed by a scholar in his study. This is an illustration of a practical man.
Yeah.
And I just love that. I think seeing Jesus saying, hey, let me tell you something you know I know about.
Yeah.
And this is how to live. So, and then he gets into talking about building on the solid foundation.
If it's okay, I would love for you to share that kind of one line that you talked about with deconstruction and how that plays into this, or kind of your take on that. I thought it was really a good way to frame deconstruction. And I know that not just people in our church that have walked through seasons of really solidifying their faith through asking a lot of questions, but also know people who have left the faith asking similar questions. And so I would love to just kind of talk about that a little bit, if that's all right. We'll be careful.
Yeah, I think so. This goes back to what Amy mentioned about the storms are coming. And in life, I think that's part of what Jesus was saying, is that you will face storms. And the Christ follower is not a ticket out of storms. And so, I even tried to define what some of those storms could be in my own life, what I've experienced. I think there are times when life hits in such a way that things feel shaking, and you start to grasp what can I hold on to, and it feels like your whole world is starting to collapse. Whether that's the losing of a job, the losing of a relationship, the losing of a loved one, sickness, just the things that hit, and that we all will face that. And Jesus doesn't promise us to not have hard times in life. I actually think he promises the opposite, but he gives us his presence in there with it. And then here he's, I think, setting up that as believers, we can make it through storms. We can endure storms without being offended, without losing faith, without having a hard heart, without, being a victim or passionless or purposeless, and that it is possible to make it through that. And so this is maybe more just me being curious. But I wonder if much of what and for the last few years, the kind of the pop word of deconstructing, how much of deconstructing is our language to try and feel like we have some control of when actually things are collapsing because we've been hit by a storm. And that storm could be disappointment in leaders. That storm could be disappointment in the church. That storm could be the pain of life. And when that storm hit, we were not built on the foundation that we thought, or on the solid foundation, on the rock. And so our houses start to crumble. They start to collapse. And then in a way of trying to feel like we're in some form of control, we put the word deconstructing on it when really it's collapsing. And I think maybe what I felt is even we're all responsible for our own decisions, but is that sometimes because, you were told to build on a foundation that is not Jesus. You were told to build on a foundation that was tradition, or a foundation that was a certain lifestyle or something. And
personality.
So I'm not saying the individual doesn't take part in it, but it's like, no. You were told this is the foundation, and that was never meant to be the foundation. Jesus was. And so this is not a pointing fingers as much as it's like storms are going to hit. And when our houses start to crumble, there's actually good things where it's like, shake the things that can be shaken, shake that which shouldn't be here. But sometimes it's so hard and the whole thing seems to be falling. And so my hope is that we would start to look at what is the foundation? What is Jesus? And so that's what it said. So to say it succinctly, that there's so much collapsing that we call deconstructing in order to feel like we're in control. But the reality is just that storms hit and we had built on the wrong foundation. And I think we've all faced that.
Yeah. Amy, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this. I just know there's people that you've walked with and seen this happen in their life, and I know you probably have some thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think just the more time has passed in walking with various people and in my own journey, I think all of us are at some point in life, you begin to, analyze, figure out what's your own faith, your faith becoming your own. So I think in your faith becoming your own, it's like at those junctures, what were the messages that you were told? What is the message that you bought into? What was the cool thing at the moment. Sadly, in Christianity, it's like this was the really cool thing to jump onto or jump into or believe or give yourself to. And I know for me, like I Kissed Dating Goodbye was like my second Bible, like purity culture was, seventh grade, let's go, and it's like where the exciting message at the time that you buy into, that then, when dating is hard, when when marriage is tricky and learning and growing, and it's like those messages then get tested, and they start to crumble.
Yeah.
And that because it was a foundation that, I bought into and trying to make my faith my own. And so I think just to say, one of the things you talked about was that it's not necessarily like your fault. And I think that a lot, maybe for some people who are out there who feel like they're in a process of deconstructing and just the shame of that. And I think just to try to remove the shame that like how many foundations have been laid in our faith that weren't Jesus, and it was a faulty theology, a faulty messaging that you're trying to figure out what is your faith now. And just to say, I'm sorry, where the messages you received was not the truth. And so the process of breaking those, of trying to figure out what is my faith now. But so we've all come through it. We've all had to wrestle with things that were a faulty foundation, that we're still saying yes to Jesus. We'll all go through that. And I think probably multiple times in our life, as storms come, we see the cracks and we see wow, I had a wrong theology. I had a wrong whatever. So anyway,
I think it's the Jesus and
that's a great
the
way to put it.
messages that have been added to, and it's not, and sometimes it's in the name of, and we all are responsible for our own responses and our own relationship with Jesus. But where is it intentionally realizing, oh man, I got some cracks in my foundation, and I want to make sure that I am rooted in Jesus. My foundation is Jesus, and where have I taken on identity or built on something in addition to, and that purposeful when I think can be helpful in our faith and in our walk with Jesus. And maybe it's been easy to villainize the word deconstructing. And if you have a bit more empathy for someone who is, you've been hit by a storm, and that's hard. And are you trying to figure it out so that you can rebuild, or are you just leaving the house? Those are different questions, but
yeah, I think one that comes to mind is the seeker-friendly church back in the 90s, early 2000s. The idea was that the local church is the hope of the world, and Jesus is the hope of the world.
Yeah.
And they got there by saying we're the body of Christ, and so we're his, which I think is good. And also, shadow side of that was the only way that you could be a good Christian is if you were inside this building, and it really took the responsibility off of like being embodied in your neighborhood, or like inviting people into your home, or responsibility of sharing your faith over a meal with somebody. Things that we're kind of, I am rediscovering as I, because I grew up in churches that really loved that idea of like, bring your person to church, and then we'll do the professional job at church of getting them all Jesused up, instead of empowering the saints for the work of ministry. And I think that's another one that has caused this like enclave separation that's not Jesus. Jesus, we're disciples of him, walking with him all the time, and we come together and we gather, and pastors should equip this church for the work of ministry. But anyway, so I think that's another one that I think about in just being in ministry, of like, how often do I revert back to just bring your friend here, and we the professionals will take care of it, compared to how do I equip as a pastor, how do I help equip people in our church to make it a part of their ecosystem, but not the only thing that matters too.
Yeah.
So
I think another one is the elitist things that I've said yes to, but okay, we need to leave the local church to be who
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah.
Like, we're called to be this special tribe, this special group of people to, say yes to this specific assignment that led to I'm better than. Well, I'm better than all that. Like, that's for like lame
Almost
Christians.
Christians.
Yeah, almost Christians. Like, they're not really loving Jesus. Like,
Yeah.
we're really doing this stuff. And I think I've been absolutely guilty of and I took a journey, 2 decades of a journey of realizing, actually, not that the local church is the hope of the world, but like the beauty,
Yeah.
how the Lord wants to use church. And so the purpose of it, the value of it,
Yeah.
and not like, I need to go find my type of Christians over here and be this little sect of Christianity that like we're the real Christians. And so I think having a wake up call to like, oh my gosh, that's so gross, but it's like you don't realize when you're in it,
Yeah.
like that, oh, okay, like we've constructed something that isn't Jesus.
Yeah.
When using like this passage of scripture, I think this is a natural conversation because deconstruction is a construction term. Jesus is giving a construction
Yeah.
picture. And so this is a natural conversation to come out of that. I think when storms hit and things start to collapse or cracks and foundations start to be revealed, the right response is are there cracks in my foundation? Is there faulty foundation? Let the storm that is causing my faith to shake, let that point to, is there something that needs to be shored up? Where there is actual desire to, quote unquote, deconstruct, maybe I would just give some encouragement. I am not a construction worker. I am not a stone worker. I am not a carpenter. I'm none of these things, right? If I was to go renovate my house, number one, it's not because I'm just trying to trash it and get out. It's because I actually want to rebuild in a different way on purpose. And secondly, I wouldn't just go start swinging a sledgehammer. I would bring in someone who knows what they're doing and can tell me that wall is weight bearing. You don't want to knock that one out. And so for people that have been hit by storms, that their faith is shaken, and they're wanting to just burn the whole thing down,
Yeah.
I would encourage you, find a mature believer that can walk you in that season and say, hey, yeah, that wall is just for aesthetics. You can change that, but this one is actually weight bearing.
Yeah.
Or, these actually, that's just paint. Paint's fine. You can change paint, but you actually need this. And that takes some humility. That takes, and it takes a desire to live in this same house on the right foundation and that you're not actually just moving. And so, and I know maybe we're taking this analogy too far, but yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think hearing all of this, I think a lot of times, like in reading this, we see the areas where we have cracks in our theology, cracks because of certain groups or people we've done things with. And I think we see those things. And a lot of times it makes us go to war on those things. And that, Jesus tells us to build on firm foundation. And I think the warning is here is even good things can be bad things. We can put our load-bearing weight on other things. And he's like, you're not putting it on me. And I think the more I've seen people lead other people astray, the more I see people trying to grasp and navigate how to do this and think they have the best way and lead other people astray when they don't know what they're doing either. And I think a lot of times we will quit on the whole house building thing because someone else didn't know what they were doing. And
Yep.
instead of just saying, you know what, I'm going to pivot and start building on Jesus, we were like, we are going to demolish their house in the
Right.
process. And I don't see how you can pull that from that portion of scripture. He's saying, build on Jesus. I think a lot of times we're so angry that we see those cracks and we're like, you're the reason I have these cracks, instead of like reorienting ourselves. It's like, no, let's go to war with the people that put the cracks in my foundation.
Right.
When it's like, no, like fix your walk. Like,
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we just let the hurt and the pain
Yes.
like lead war, when Jesus is like, no, don't like get mad and go find the builder and get him fired. Like, no, start building correctly.
Yeah.
Start looking how you can put together your faith in Jesus once again. And I think we get so preoccupied. Like the house is falling apart and we're like, no, I'm going to go start prepping to go after this person. I'm going to go start going after this. And all in the midst of that anger and going out and exposing, your house is still falling apart.
Yep.
Yeah.
Where I think the first thing we need to
Yes.
do is say, okay, Jesus, I have these cracks.
Yes.
How do I get you back as the foundation?
Yes.
Rather than going and doing all the other things first.
Yes.
Where we see a lot of unhealthy people with their house collapsing,
Taking
saying,
sledgehammers to somebody else.
yes, I'm going to go and, do other things. And Jesus is like, no, I want you.
Yeah.
I want you with me, healthy, living the full life, but you're too busy, too preoccupied, pointing out all the other houses that have cracks and things like
Yes.
that, where you miss your house is in rubble, is in shambles.
Yep.
I think even
Really good.
even along the lines of like looking at others and comparing, essentially.
Yeah.
Jesus gives 3 different storms. The rains came down, the streams rose, the winds blew. Maybe this is one storm, but 3 different things happening.
Ways it's affecting you.
And I think it's easy to see wind hitting a house and it start to collapse and be like, oh, they must have a bad foundation. The wind's not messing with my house. I must have a good foundation. When the streams rising might be what takes out my my house.
That's a word.
And so it's easy to look at others and say, oh, they must not have a good foundation.
Yeah.
But mine's secure because look, this I got hit by the same storm and it didn't mess with me. But we don't know what storms are coming, and there may be other types of storms that actually will hit weaknesses in our foundation in different ways. So it's never our job to look at somebody else, judgment, right? To look at somebody
Yes, the
else
plank
and
and the sawdust.
say, oh, I'm going to compare our foundations because they're struggling and I'm not. Or opposite. Oh, my house is crumbling and they seem to be fine. They must be so much better than me. That's no winners in that game. And so, and that I think is a temptation we have sometimes is to not realize that different storms hit us throughout life and to never be overly confident, but always be, God, search me, know me. Is there any offensive way? Is there any fault in my foundation? Am I building on anything other than the rock? Which is, I think, Jesus' answer when, okay, how do I know I'm building on the right foundation? And how do I know I'm building the right house? So I do think Jesus says those who hear and obey. So I think putting into practice the Sermon on the Mount lifestyle throughout our lives, and every season it may have new challenges to be meek, to not judge. There's probably times when I felt like it was easy, like I don't hate anybody,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden things happen, and it's like, oh, maybe there is anger in my heart, and so
Absolutely.
we continue to want to live the Sermon on the Mount lifestyle, hearing it and obeying it, putting it into practice of what James writes, right? Not just being doers of, or being doers of the word, not just hearers. But again, the idea is that Jesus is that foundation. And so he's the one he is the chief cornerstone. He is the rock. And I love the article, the rock, not a rock, but he's the rock. And so I think that is where, if there was any form of practical, it's like, no, hear the words of Jesus and put them into practice in relationship with him.
alongside.
alongside him
exactly.
with the empowerment of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And so,
I think your point too of that it changes over time and it grows, putting these things into practice grows over time. So, meekness is a good example. Whereas for much of my life, I haven't felt like I need to be domineering or try and find a way to have power and use it in a scenario. And I was just talking to you guys yesterday about in my parenthood journey, now all of a sudden I am encountering in me this draw to not want to be meek with my kids, but to want to be domineering and like use my power. Whoa, that's crazy. That's a new journey in my discipleship where I haven't experienced that before in that way. That's just not something that has been a part of my world, and it's been a part of plenty of people's worlds. Otherwise, it wouldn't be thrown around, And there's other things that have been much more challenging for me in other seasons. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. It's like as we walk with Jesus, he'll just highlight to us, hey, this one's coming up right now, and remember these teachings. And so being aware of his teachings to know how to put them into practice is important. I think sometimes this is a totally random thought, but I remember sometimes being in youth group, arrogant little kid, and going, I don't need to pay attention in this sermon because I've heard this before. What a church kid thing to say, right? But like, I don't need to pay attention to your little sermon on whatever youth pastor guy because I'm thinking to myself, man, how valuable it would be every time scripture is preached to soak that in so that when a particular storm comes, or not even particular storm, when the time comes to build on a teaching of Jesus, I have the teaching to be able to use to build. If I listen to more sermons on meekness, I may have some more tools in my belt in this season. And now I may have to go seek them out. I'm overusing this example. It could be any of those things, But I think that's an interesting thought that's coming up to me right now is how many times have I sat in a service, especially as a really young person, thinking, well, I don't need to hear this again. I know the 5,000, feeding of the 5,000, check out, rather than actually trying to, okay, what can I learn? What can I learn? Because when it comes time to put these into practice, I want to have a depth of knowledge in them.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And I think as we moved towards, it was Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday.
Yeah.
I believe Jesus was saying, I am the rock. And that imagery was not lost on the original hearers, I believe. Or if nothing else, that Jesus was letting them know so that when they look back, that he is, and it's Isaiah 28, that he is the precious cornerstone, for a sure foundation, the one who trusts will never be dismayed. And Peter quotes that same, in talking about Jesus. Paul quotes the same, Psalm 118. Jesus would have sang on the night he was betrayed, and the night that the whole weekend kicked off. And then just throughout.
Yeah, say that again. That was so cool. Or say that part again. Preach that part again.
So
It was so cool.
Just so many scriptures about the cornerstone, the precious cornerstone, the living stone. And so Jesus, after they would have been having Passover, and after the third cup, after when he would have taken, this is my bread, this is the bread, my body, this is the blood. And then it says that in Luke, I think it says that they sang a hymn. That hymn would have been the Hallel, which is when they sing Psalm 115 through Psalm 118. And so Psalm 118, this would have been the last song Jesus sung. I'm imagining he wasn't whistling on his way. Anyway, like the last song he would have sung, Psalm 118 and verse 22, towards the end of that psalm is the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. The Lord has done it this very day. Let us rejoice today and be glad.
So good.
He would have been singing about himself as he's going to be the rock of our salvation. And so, again in Acts, Luke writes that the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Salvation is found in no one else. So this is where it pivots to salvation. The cornerstone is salvation. Throughout the Psalms, we have rock of my salvation, the rock of our salvation, God, my rock, my salvation. And so he is that rock. And he would have been singing about the cornerstone that was rejected in the process of going to the cross. I love it. And so, anyways, so I think Jesus was saying, hey, that's me. I'm the rock. I am the rock of your salvation. And so I don't know if we want to dive into that a bit more. We've talked about it the whole time. Jesus is the foundation. I think I would point to John 15. What does it mean to build on Jesus? It is to abide.
Yeah.
It is to remain in him. It is to, so the story you're giving, when you're feeling as a parent, as a dad, and all this new things, what you talked about was abiding. The Holy Spirit whispering in your ear,
Yeah.
you having dialogue with God in the midst of the difficulty in parenting is wild in those moments, you know, but that is abiding. And that is so that the storm of confrontation hits. And how can this storm not shake me? I'm going to abide in Jesus. I'm going to stay in him. I'm going to have a relationship with him, and he's going to lead me. And so this is part of, I think, building our foundation in him is abiding and following, and then hearing and doing. But it is him as the rock of our salvation.
I love that what we build on is not just teaching. It is a resurrection life moment, you know? And so him saying, I'm the rock to build on in Matthew 7, people may have gone, oh, you're teaching. Great. Your rock is the teaching. So the good things you've said, the authority that you preach with, which is awesome, you know? But what you're saying here, and what I think is true as we look at the scope of the whole Bible, is the hinge moment of all of humanity is what we build our lives on. So he's saying, build your life on the resurrection power, the resurrection life.
Yes.
You know what I mean? On relationship with me, and it matters because I've overcome death, overcome sin and death.
Which is the promise. I think the promise is as we build on Jesus, as the house that is constructed is able to endure storms. But his promise is not just that we can go through life enduring storms.
Yeah.
The promise is you can endure the storms. You can not be bitter, offended, passionless, purposeless. Not only that we can endure storms, but that we can have life and life to the full, abundant life. John 10, this is right. That's what he has come to give us. That type of life, hope and peace and joy and the fullness of life, resurrected life. So it's not just build on the rock. Like the promise is build on this and you will have resurrected life. Yeah. You will face storms. You can endure them, and you can have a thriving life even in the midst of that. And that's the promise. That's what he's given because he lived. This is the story, right? So he lived what we couldn't live. He was perfect. He was sinless. He died a death we deserved, and then death couldn't hold him. He rose from the grave. He ascended to heaven and today is seated enthroned, and he's alive. And he's not just a good teacher from the past that we're trying to model our life after. He is alive today, and the same spirit that raised him from the dead now lives in us. And now I'm just preaching. But,
I know.
But that's how we can have abundant resurrected life.
Amy or Eric, what does it look like when somebody lives the Christian life as though they've just battened down the hatches to endure until death? What's the difference in somebody that in people that live that way versus that live an abundant life?
You go first.
You go.
Oh my
Keep asking the question.
I have
give me more details.
an answer.
I
You said Amy or Eric because I've talked so much.
Yeah.
I think it's hope. I think you see it in people that face storms, and they can articulate, this is really hard. They don't pretend like life is not hard.
Yeah.
But they're not destroyed by it. They have hope in a future, and that future may be eternity. But there is hope. There is life in the midst of the hardship. Versus, this is all there is, and I have, and so
I think they're not cynical.
Ooh, that's good.
Like I think they have an outlook on life of knowing storms will come, but they've abided in Jesus.
having a
lived,
remained.
remained.
Remains
Totally about.
connected to the vine. And they've done the work of, oh my gosh, okay, this was a hard storm, and I am offended. I'm offended at you, God, and I'm going to talk to you about it. I'm mad about this storm. I'm mad about, that this crack was here. And they've talked to God about it all along the way. And as they've talked to him, then I think he heals. And so therefore they're not cynical and bitter and just holding on.
Yeah. Cynical is a good
But
thought.
they're trusting, and they're full of joy and peace and confidence in God, and they wear it. Like, people who wear that.
Wear it. That's a good
And,
way to put it.
Yeah, you can't hide it. That's what's scary.
Yeah, that's true. Especially as you get older, though.
Yes.
Like this is so bad to say, but like if you are an angry person, you will get an angry old person face. You are not. I don't know. There might be science. There might not be science. I'm just saying people that I know and I've had conversations with them and they're angry folks and they get older, their face is an angry folks face. And otherwise, if they're smiley people and they're not cynical, you can kind of see it on their face. That's why I run to talk to Di Williams every single week.
Yes, like J.C. Williams.
You know what I mean? And there's so many more.
Yeah.
That's not just the only people who are.
Joseph Winger.
Joseph
Yep.
Winger, absolutely.
My goodness.
Yeah. What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, I think us, in partnership with God, dealing with those storms, we get to experience the power of the promises.
Yeah, that's good.
I think in trusting that He is the firm foundation and being poor in spirit when everything is telling you not to be poor in spirit, you get to live in the isolated reality of yours is the like you get heaven. And I think like we don't give enough credit to the resurrection power in the truths. Like once again, the epicenter of the kingdom that is near is the resurrected Jesus and the power that follows in that. Like when Jesus sent out in the Great Commission, He told them to preach the gospel and that signs and wonders would confirm the word. And I think our lifestyle is that when we live in the foundation of Jesus, we get to see the signs and wonders of somehow we still have fruit bearing it in our lives when we are feeling the hardships, the wind, the rain, and climates where things are not meant to grow, things are still growing. In climates or storms where things are not meant to survive and withstand, it's the story of like you see where there is a tornado, but there is this one house that is still standing there. And I think those are the signs and wonders of like somehow there has been hardship after hardship in your life, yet you have peace and joy. Those are the signs and wonders that confirm His word and confirm the power of if He is the foundation. It is not the avoidance of the storm. It is the survival and the life-giving dunamis power of still having eyes focused on Jesus and a heart that doesn't grow bitter.
Yes.
And that you can still have joy and you can still operate in generosity in the midst of the hardest things going on in life. That is not 10 steps that work. That is the resurrection
Yes.
power of God keeping your heart tender when everything says, bury down the hatchets.
Yeah.
Don't let anything in. And it's like, no, I'm going to trust to be vulnerable and see God still work, even if you betray me. Because Jesus did it.
Yeah.
He opened up. I was crying with Andrew on this on Thursday. Like Jesus served people that betrayed him.
Yeah.
And yet when He resurrected and could have had the big, like, I told you moment, you really screwed up. He went to people in kindness
Yeah.
and was still
He
tenderhearted.
tracked him down.
And He was killed. And how many times do we get slightly wrong and it just like, but the power is that we can weather those storms and still be tender, still be loving. And that is a miracle. That is not your natural disposition. That is a work of God in your life. And we don't think it is. We just think, oh, Kenny's a nice, generous person. That's
some
why.
people are nice, some people aren't.
Exactly. And that is God working.
That's right.
And you've built your life, and he is bringing out fruit, love, joy,
Yes.
peace, patience, kindness.
Yes.
Like, and we're like, no, that's just no, that is the work of God. And you built your life on the foundation, and you can still be those things even if life says no.
So good.
So good.
Well, Dan, why don't you take us home?
One of the things that I was, as just sitting in the scripture of this story, was seeing how much when Jesus rose from the grave, his closest friends, the women who first went to the tomb, his disciples, when those women went and told him, his disciples, when he was with them, that they didn't believe it. They didn't recognize him. They didn't believe it. They thought this story is too wild of a tale. And so just even feeling for the people that went to church on Easter Sunday and heard this story of someone who was killed and rose from the dead and is the only person in history to have ever done that, and would say, that story seems unbelievable. I just was encouraged that even Jesus' closest friends, the story was unbelievable. It was incredible. It was too much. And I remember one time I heard Pete Gregg was preaching, and he said this phrase that faith without doubt is not faith. And it was like permission to actually have questions, because in order for it to be faith and not certainty, there has to be a level of, this seems wild, this seems incredible. And so just give permission where the story seems too good to be true, where it seems like, I don't know how scientifically that's possible, where it's whatever it may be. And what we see in Luke, and my prayer for us, my prayer for anyone who might be in that place, is that Jesus would do for us today what he did for his disciples then. And so in Luke 24, when he appears to them, rose from the dead, appears to his closest friends, and they don't recognize him and they don't believe it. And he says, why are you troubled? Why do doubts arise in your hearts? And then there's two things we see in Luke 24. On the road to Emmaus, did not our hearts burn within us as he opened the scriptures to us? And then later in Luke 24, it says, then he, Jesus, opened their minds so that they could understand the scriptures. That they would understand that the Messiah must suffer and rise from the dead, and on the third day, and the repentance for the forgiveness of sins will be preached in his name to all nations. So, God, would you open our minds? Would you give us open minds? Would you open our hearts to receive? Would you teach us the scriptures? And he's the one that does it. Very few people, I think, are argued into the kingdom.
Right.
But would God open the scriptures? Would he open our minds? Would he open our hearts to receive? And if a person has doubt, I want to believe, but I don't know, would we ask, God, would you open my mind? Would you open my heart that I would receive, that I would understand the scripture, and would you do the work? And that's my prayer for us as we hear this story that is seemingly too good to be true, but it is a really good story, that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. At just the right time, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us, and that the same spirit that pulled him up out of the grave now lives in us. And that's our story. So
Thanks for being with us at the Boulder Street Conversations podcast. Grateful that you would spend time with us. If you want to get more connected to our church, go to boulderstreet.org/connect. You can send us an email there, sign up for anything that we have. We'd love to get more connected with you. We'd love to see you on Sunday. We meet at 10 a.m. at 828 East Boulder Street.